Well, we've heard a lot about the State of the Union on the national scale, but what about here in Florida? The president delivered his annual speech Tuesday night, but not before several Florida politicians beat him to it. It was really no surprise what topics the president would be covering. He wasn't really keeping them under wraps. In fact, he traveled the country talking all about his policies. But here in Florida, the recent shift in Cuban policy, very hot controversy. Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart says the president gave up just too much ground to the Castros.
Regardless of where one may be on the issue of whether you like the idea of sanctions or you don't like the idea of sanctions in general. But if you have sanctions against a bad player and you're going to get rid of those sanctions, my God, at least get something in return. And this president has gotten nothing in return.
Critical of the negotiations there, Diaz-Balart says instead the president gave a reward, a green light essentially, to the communist country for keeping their political prisoners for so long. And because they waited that long, they were rewarded. But perhaps the most damning, the most scathing comments came from Congressman Carlos Curbelo.
Since the Cuban tragedy began 56 years ago, the American president, to varying degrees, had always been on the right side of history. Presidents from both parties, from Eisenhower to Bush, had recognized that the Cuban government is an enemy of the United States, a chronic violator of human rights, and a government that has no place in this hemisphere or on this earth for that matter.
And we're also hearing word out of Cuba that apparently the president has been overselling his quick fix plan to restore relations with Cuba. A senior official in Havana says not so fast. The relationship has been out of sorts with the U.S. for 56 years, and they say there's no way it's just going to turn on a dime in 56 minutes. Even while many conservatives believe the U.S. has already given up far too much in these negotiations, the Cuban government still has a long list of demands before they say they will completely change and shift their stance toward the U.S. A long way to go. Enough with the State of the Union. How about the state of the city? West Palm Beach, that is. Monday night, the mayor of West Palm Beach delivered her speech, boasting about her accomplishments in office. Mayor Jerry Moyo highlighted lower crime rates and low utility bills as some of her key moments in office. She also used that State of the City address as a platform to push for re-election. Now, the vote less than 3 months away. Time is running out. Mayor Moyo says her track record speaks for itself. Now, in just a matter of weeks, the voters will decide whether or not she gets to keep her job. Moyo will face off against her challenger, Kimberly Mitchell.
I've watched the mistakes, I've watched the missed opportunities, and I know that as a community with a good leader, with a strong vision, we can do better.
Now, one of the key areas of debate between these two opponents, the Broadway corridor. Now, Mayor Moyo says Mitchell's criticism isn't fair.
If Kimberly Mitchell were mayor, she would have given away the 160 acres of land worth $25 million. I was not going to do that.
Now, again, that election coming up in just a few weeks. Now, moving on to other news. In Broward County, a new bill sparks yet another controversy over gun control. This time, state representatives are firing away. They're aiming to legalize concealed weapons on a college campus. It's a conservative response to these several violent attacks we've seen on college campuses in recent days. Now, you've heard both sides of the argument before. It's been discussed. It's been rehearsed. Some say more guns in the right hands could reduce crime. Others argue stricter gun laws are the answer instead. Now, Sarasota Representative Greg Stoib sponsored the bill. He says this: "What I'm trying to do is prevent further loss of life by giving God-fearing and law-abiding citizens who have gone through background checks the ability to defend themselves and their families." But obviously, not everyone agrees with his approach. Now, this debate reaches all the way into the top ranks of the college leadership itself. Professors, administrators, many of them also torn down the middle on this issue. Now, they agree security has not been up to par, but how to fix the issue, it's all a matter of perspective. Representative Dennis Baxley from Ocala says a law like this is exactly what the colleges need. He says violent perpetrators do not follow your rules. Talking to lawmakers, he says you can put out as many gun-free rules as you want. They, the perpetrators, don't care. That's actually what they're looking for. Now, if this law is signed into action, it would only allow those who have valid permits and background checks. They would be allowed to carry concealed weapons. They would have to be 21 years old with no felonies or drug-related convictions. In Fort Lauderdale, a well-known real estate dealer learns his fate. Late last year, authorities arrested 44-year-old Chris White on 10 counts of federal crime. And we're talking fraud. This is some big money here. On Tuesday, White showed up in court, didn't even try to defend himself. In fact, he pleaded guilty to all 10 federal charges, including ripping off his customers to the tune of $5.5 million. Prosecutors say White pressured his clients to send him big deposits up front. Then instead of using that money to secure their properties like he promised, he instead used it to pay back previous client down payments, paid some of his own personal expenses, and get this, he even used some of that same money to pay his own defense attorneys. Now, all of this he admitted in court. Now he's stripped of his real estate license, sentenced to 3.5 years in prison, and after he's released, he'll be deported back to his home country in Jamaica. And in other news from Fort Lauderdale, an election controversy now over as a judge makes a final ruling. But this is just the beginning. This argument stems from where a candidate lives. Should he be allowed to run for office in the city if he lives outside of Fort Lauderdale? Now, some people care a lot about this. Others say it doesn't matter so much. It depends on who you talk to. But Broward Circuit Judge Carlos Rodriguez says, yes, he should be able to be on the ballot, which means at the ballot box on February 10, you will see Commissioner Robert McKenzie's name on the ballot. Now, his two challengers, no surprise here, they were the ones who were trying to get him disqualified from the ballot. They were complaining he doesn't actually live at the address that he claims he does as a permanent residence. They say he lives elsewhere in Plantation, and that should disqualify him. But the judge says it's a matter of interpretation. He sees the rule differently, and that McKenzie meets all the requirements to run for office in Fort Lauderdale. Judge Rodriguez is an interesting fact. He was one of the 12 judges appointed by former Governor Charlie Crist. So you see his ties there. Now, Crist, of course, had special ties to convicted Ponzi scheme artist Scott Rothstein. If you remember from a few years back, Rothstein was actually on the Judicial Nominating Commission himself in West Palm Beach. Under oath in 2008, Rothstein admitted his influence over Governor Crist is the very reason Rodriguez and several other judges were all appointed to the bench. 2 days before Rodriguez was appointed, Rothstein gave $100,000 to Crist's political party organizers at the RPOF at the time. Now, it's certainly interesting to watch how many decisions are still affected today by those 12 judges named into power.